Welcome everyone. I'm Kat Sheridan here with the Ohio Arts Council's Rife Gallery. This is Expanded Dimensions, the Quilt and Surface Design Symposium 2020. This exhibition has 10 artists in it, and we're really pleased to share with you Deborah Griffing tonight. She's gonna take you through a bit of her inspiration, some of her process, and has some really great stories behind a few of these slides I'm very excited to learn about. So just a couple of housekeeping items. We're going to keep everybody on mute. If you have any questions whatsoever, there's a little chat bubble at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You can just pop in there and ask your questions. The same on Facebook Live. Feel free to ask questions. We will make sure to get those questions to Deborah so that she can answer them during the Q&A session. All right, without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Deborah.
All right, thank you, Kat. Yes, my name's Deborah Griffing. I live in Sunbury, Ohio, which is north of Columbus. However, I work in Columbus, and I've really spent my whole life growing up in Columbus. My parents were both faculty at OSU. This is my wonderful husband, Pug Heller. We met at OSU. We were both in the art department, and we do a lot of kayaking in the summer. And my two beautiful daughters who are now grown adults. They also live in Ohio. This is a shot of my studio. I tend to work in I seem to always work in very cluttered spaces, which I know probably would drive some people crazy, but I tend to like to have things overlapping and all around me. When I accidentally come across something in my studio, it usually triggers ideas. And so, I like to have unexpected clutter helps, creativity blossom. At least that's what I'd like to think. This is my mother, Dr. Penelope Griffing. She was a professor in child development at OSU. Her research was in child psychology and the creative play of preschool children. This is a picture of her talking to my sister, Cindy. We all joked that my mother kind of, did a lot of research on all four of us kids. I had imaginary friends. I had 13 imaginary friends and an imaginary dog named Rocky, so I was quite the star in her research. This is my father, Dr. Bruce Griffing, who was also a faculty at OSU. He was a geneticist. He was the chairman of the Department of Genetics and did research in with Arabidopsis. He was a plant geneticist, and there he is with his colleagues. And I spent all my years growing up going to his office and being really fascinated with all the test tubes and the weird flames and the shaking agar gel tubes. And both my parents really instilled the love of learning, the questioning of creativity and the mind. And my father really, really got me interested in science and researching things. I collected rocks and was always asking questions. Now, for the last 15 years, I've worked at the Goodwill Art Studio and Gallery, which is in Grandview. I'm the manager there, and I work with wonderful people. The artists there have, for the most part, developmental disabilities and are some of the most creative individuals you could possibly come across. It's been a gift to work there. It's just a percolating environment of creativity and laughter and oddity, and I work with some pretty wonderful colleagues. Cody Miller, who is a resident artist there. I've worked with him since 2011, and Cody, all of the artists there and the staff that I've worked with have influenced me tremendously. One thing, when you leave college and you're not in that studio collegiate setting, you become isolated. And so it's been really fortunate that I found a place where I'm surrounded by people making things. Cody's work is a lot of collage. And so he really got me interested in collage as a process. This is a painting, it's a fairly large painting. And it's all bits and pieces of collage on a large clayboard panel. And it's now, actually the work that's here in the gallery has a lot of collage in it. I mean, my work really took a turn for the better with Cody's influence. This is another piece that has painting and collage involved in it. When I discovered that I could draw things and then glue them into the painting and get that sense of drawing in with paint, I just fell in love with that. This is my colleague, my other resident artist, Nicholas Warndorf. This is a cyanotype. Nicholas has kind of this endless curiosity of how things are going to develop, and he uses nature and lets a lot of the a lot of the process of how something evolves, he leaves it up to chance. This is a cyanotype that he left outside. One of the cyanotypes he left out, he left many outside in different parts of the city. This one, I'm not sure if this is the one that he left right outside of Goodwill, but it was out there for at least a week, which really kind of cracked me up. But it did amazing subtle variations in colors. So Nicholas got me really interested in, letting nature, letting the force of nature and letting things that are out of my control work on my art. So this is a large piece of paper that I left outside. It survived many a windstorm and a rainstorm. And I was really interested in how the colors on the paper moved when they got rained on. And I have a background in ceramics, and my undergraduate degree was in ceramics. And I really loved that, opening that kiln and not really knowing what's of course, I wasn't the greatest ceramicist, so I went on to painting. But anyway, you'd open the kiln and you wouldn't know what you would find. And it would always sometimes be a disaster and sometimes be this miraculous wonderfulness. And this is kind of like going back to that letting go of the tight control of making and letting incidental things happen. He also introduced me to Yupo paper, which is a material that I've used a lot in the work that's here. It's a very beautiful, soft and tough surface that you can scratch and bend and draw on and paint on. And this is a little sculpture with industrial felt, which is also a material I've used in my work here. This again is the Yupo paper is the white paper at the bottom. One of the things with the translucent Yupo paper that I really love is that you can draw on the back and get these ghost images. And so you have drawing on the front of the paper and drawing on the back of the paper. And it's also such a smooth plastic-like surface. I really like the contrast of that to paper and fiber. One thing that's very important to me is to have a sense of different kinds of textures in my work. This is Kate Gorman, who I've known for many years. She no longer works at Goodwill, but is my dear friend and will always be a huge influence in my life. She turned me on to carrying sketchbooks with me everywhere. And now I'm kind of a compulsive sketchbooker. In fact, if I'm stopped in traffic, I will pull my sketchbook out. Sometimes I get beeped at because I get involved, but I have a lot of drawings of the backs of cars and traffic lights. This is a sketchbook, and the paper is pretty thin and not very good. And I grew to love it because it bled through. And I started getting really interested in the problem solving of how to work with the bleed through into the next page. And I found that as pages went by, they just kind of told their own story to me. I just had to keep working with the bleed through, and one page would turn to the next page and turn to the next page. This is a sketchbook, a larger one. I started working a lot with egg tempera and watercolors. I think, one of my happiest days, for me to be a happy person, I think sitting outside with a sketchbook and paints I'm pretty freaking happy. It's hard to go back inside in the cold weather and be painting inside. And she also introduced a process called Deconstructed Silk Screen, which there's a piece here in the gallery that I'll point out to you. But it's a wonderful process of that gets these just incredible rich line quality. I'm going to show just a few pictures of some of the artists from Goodwill. This is a piece by Helen Taylor. It's the newest piece of the gallery, and it's in the front window. If you want to go by and say hello to Matilda, you can drive past Goodwill on Edge Hill Road, across from the giant eagle in the Grandview Yard. And it's a pretty magnificent bird. This is Charlotte McGraw, who is the permanent mayor of Charlottesville, and she's probably one of the most entertaining people that you could ever come across, and also incredibly inspiring. If you go to the YouTube and look up Broad and High, Charlotte McGraw, you'll see a wonderful video of her. And this is Jeff Meadows. The piece that he's working on was purchased for the convention center and is hanging at the convention center. He comes to the studio every day, and it's a huge part of his life. And he does, he's a very charming guy. This is a piece by Charles Knueven, and this is the last artist of the studio that I'm going to talk about, but I was really drawn. This is, it's actually not a piece, it's a whole lot of his drawings. The guy is just a machine who draws and draws and draws. And he's very quiet, and he's nonstop drawing. He has that wonderful, beautiful obsession of mark making. And we put all the drawings together and covered a whole wall with them. And I think it's just like one of the most powerful pieces ever. And it kind of captures, you know, one of the things that I love so much is obsession. And I think that he does it, and it's just, it's outstanding. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of like more overall themes that run through my work and has been heavily part of my work over the past 5 years. I'm really interested in the idea of huge, the universe, galaxies, beyond our comprehension kind of size. And then on the opposite end is is the microscopic. This is actually Arabidopsis, the plant that my father worked with. And in a lot of ways, they mimic each other. They if you look at a slide of, or a picture of the galaxy and a picture of, say, a cell, it's similar in looking. I think that in the universe, everywhere, everything is connected and reflects and talks back to one another. That kind of sounds silly, but this was a painting that I really tried to get that sense of enormous, and the sense of the minuscule and the microscopic. So it's kind of a combination of the idea of mountains and the idea of the cellular. And this is done on clayboard with pigment sticks and cold wax. I use a lot of cold wax to get textures, and I really love clayboard because you can see where the white lines are. It's where I scraped in, and you can just get these wonderful, sharp lines by scraping into the surface. I'm also very, very interested in infrastructure and industry, and this is a husband and wife team I just love their work. And with these huge industrial shapes, you can see that they're figurative and animal-like, and I don't really know exactly what they're intended for. I know when my daughter lived in San Francisco, you would see these things. I imagine they have to do with the shipping industry. They're all along the side of the water, and they were just these huge monsters. So I really bring a lot of that into my work. And I suppose it's environmental in a sense. It's also, industry is not going to go away. We're going to be living with it forever, and it can do really good things. And it can also be beautiful. I do believe that you can find beauty in everything, depending on, if you can just get your perspective around it. And the way industrial structures also imitate organic structures, I find that very, very interesting. Obviously organic structures work. And so of course it's gonna make sense to build things like an organic structure to, and it's all going to work. So they're kind of, brother and sister, or a part of the same family in a weird kind of way. Again, this is oil paint with cold wax on clayboard. This is another piece that's, very much about industry. I don't know if any of you folks have driven past industrial complex at night with all the lights on, and it's like a fairyland. It's gorgeous. It's, I would also imagine incredibly destructive to the environment, but it's also powerfully beautiful. And I also am very, very interested in structures that people live in. This is called artificial intelligence, where there's also a lot of like speakers and lights looking down. This is a painting that is a little bit different. I used egg tempera and inks with it. It's also on clayboard. Again, it's following the same theme of infrastructure and communication. I'm getting a little bit into the idea of communication with telephone lines and rabbit ears and things like that. These are some details. And then you have, which I think is really interesting, is the infrastructure of these industrial looking structures that are all just about recreation. They're like other industrial things which are about, moving people around. This is just moving people around for crazy, no good reason other than fun, or, making yourself sick. But I think amusement parks are really, really fascinating. And I was telling my colleagues at work that I think there's nothing sadder than an abandoned amusement park. It's an amusement park that is empty is just screaming lack of people, it's more than lonely. It's more than, a house that's empty. It's lack of noise. It's a vacuum in a way. So anyway, this is a painting of a vibrant neighborhood with the amusement park behind it. I did a teaching up in Sandusky, Ohio, and Cedar Point was in the background all the time. And so this was kind of about that same time period when I worked up there. And it's such an odd, amusement parks are they're odd, very odd, but beautiful. And this is more of the decay of it. And this one is done with egg tempera and micron markers. So this is a different kind of infrastructure. I'm really, really interested in small creatures and insects. And this is kind of the structures of the skeleton. These are cicadas. But again, like I said, there's this kind of mimicking of industrial and organic, like all the veins in the wings of the cicada are so delicate, but they're so strong. They're carrying this little creature around, just like those big industrial things that I said that I saw in San Francisco. They're all linear, and functional. This is just a different kind. And then here are some exoskeletons that are made for humans, to take humans into places where humans probably shouldn't really be, or generally don't go, or can't survive. And I think these are ridiculous looking and fascinating and terrifying. So these are all submersibles. I'm just as interested in astronomy, but I think these are just far more hilarious looking than the astronaut suits. And I can't imagine getting into one of them. But I've been very, very, very interested in, human beings ending up in places where naturally they're not going to survive. So this is a painting on clayboard. It's about, being underwater. It also has a lot of imagery of dresses and cages. I do think that dresses are also, and clothing are kind of exoskeletons. They're things that, keep our soft little fleshy bodies safe from the elements. So I see them all as being related. This is a little bit of a larger painting along with the same theme. I really like the imagery of the empty holes where the faces go. And so I started really making a lot of creatures that have these legs, but empty spaces for the face. Not to say that they're, there's nobody in there, but that they're mysterious. And again, this is clayboard. All of my paintings have, for the most part, are clayboard, and I do use cold wax and oil paint or pigment sticks in everything. And then another kind of structure that is really a big part of my work is urban spaces. This is from Edinburgh. Recently, I went to Cuba. I really think large urban places are really fascinating. I think places that house people are really fascinating. In a sense, they're also like our skeletons, and they're also for the same purpose of, keeping us in safe places. So I started making, well, I've always made dolls, but I started making dolls as houses. And this is a little one. So there's a lot of me that's, there's kind of two parts of me. There's the painter of me, and then there's the sewer of me. And the work that's in the gallery now, I'm kind of trying to bring them two together a little bit more. And sewing is a different kind of process than painting, and it's very, very slow. And it's meditative. And you touch it so much. With painting, you're not touching your surface all the time, but with sewing, you're touching every little bit of it. And there's something in sewn work, hand sewn work, where you can see the stitched line. It really evokes the movement of the artist. I love people's embroidery. I love hand stitched work. When you look at stitching, because I'm a sewer, can see that needle going in and out, and the time it takes to make each stitch. It's got a richness to it. So these are more houses. And I like having, I like making things that I would have enjoyed as a child. So a lot of the houses and the sewn things have doors with little things that will come out of them. This one had birds living in the different spaces. Oops, let me go back. Now I'm going in the wrong direction. I was just going to say that the little bird on the bottom is needle felting. So I made a lot of houses with birds in them, tucked into little places. And in this house, I kind of the stitched and drawn areas are like miniature quilts. This is a photographer that I really love. It's photography that he does has a storyline to it, and it really talks about the human condition. And as I've gotten older, and also because of where I work with people a lot. I work with different personalities, and I work with people that think differently. I work with people that communicate differently. Some nonverbal, some through sign language, some they're communicating in a world that I don't really have access to. And I think it's all just this beautiful, human condition. And this is one of my favorite works of art. And I think this really kind of speaks to how I see the human condition and kind of the dissolving into spirit, which, I believe we will all do at some point in time. And it's a very powerful imagery to me. So I work with people with cognitive disabilities. I also have a lot of experience with mental health disabilities. My member of my family is schizophrenic, and is just a beautiful human being. So knowing him all my life and knowing how the variations in his mind and variations of how medication works, or where he is of the shifting sands of his mental landscape. I find it really something I think about quite a bit. And my mother had Alzheimer's. So these are all kind of things that are working in amongst my work. As I said, I had imaginary friends as a child. And as an adult, I make imaginary places. And so this is kind of where my mind likes to go, is I like to fabricate places. This is a collage, an outer space. When I'm working like this, I can just walk into it, and maybe it's escapism. I'm kind of leaving the world behind. My daughters say this one's really scary. I don't think so. I think it's absolutely, well, maybe a little scary, but I've always had a lot of imagination, and I really, really like to dwell in my brain. I'm happy being by myself a lot of times, so I can go into these places. And then this is kind of a turning point. I'm going to turn a little bit more into the mental health. This is when my father died. I started thinking of chairs as a symbol of absence and loss. A chair is a place where it's solely designed for a person to sit, and so when it's empty, that is definitely a loss. And my mother had Alzheimer's and was on hospice for 5.5 years. It was a very, very difficult time of my life, dealing with my mother's Alzheimer's and the sorrow of that. And so my work kind of has taken that turn into exploring kind of the dissolving and chaos and confusion that I watched with her. And I watched with one of the things about where I work, I do see people get sick and get confused. And it's difficult. There's beautiful elements in it. And so that's kind of where I am now in a lot of my work. This is a really new painting. I just finished it. It's really fairly large. I think it's about 6 feet, 4 feet by 6 feet maybe. And again, it's kind of the walk. This is kind of like walking through your confusion and shadows and maybe, maybe COVID is a little bit in here too, of fear. Again, another one where it's a lot of tangled lines, tangled imagery. And I guess I'd like to say, with these, there's a lot of sadness in it, but I think there's also a lot of beauty. As my mother was very, very ill, there was still beauty in her eyes, and it's kind of, sometimes it's hard to find that, but it's you have to find beauty everywhere. I recently went to Great Britain and did a workshop with Rosalind Wyatt, who really, I'm going to talk a little bit more about stitching again, which she really got me thinking a lot about how the stitched line can be look like a drawn line. It can mimic drawing, can be used as illustration. And then this is Judith Scott, who's a artist who had Down syndrome. And she just made these enormous obsessive sculptures. And I think I mentioned it earlier, but obsession is I'm a big fan of obsession. It can be a destructive thing, or it can be something that makes something as beautiful as this. When you take obsession and you turn it to creativity, and you turn it to where it's just bursting at the edges, you come up with really extraordinary things. I think that's kind of what I try to aim for. You can tell I like Judith Scott. I've got lots of photos of her work. But that's what I try to aim for in the sewing that I do, in particular. This is a doll who unravels. And in the unraveled part are little doors that open up, and there's elements that you can peek at. And it's all of my sewn pieces are all hand sewn. I don't use a machine, partly because if I use a machine, then I can't hear my British murder mystery that I usually have playing either on audiobooks or on TV. I like the silence or the quietness of the sewing. And again, I really try to get that sense of, I don't have trouble getting the sense of obsession. I will fully admit I'm a pretty obsessive person, and I thoroughly embrace it in my work. There is about a billion stitches holding this doll together. And I would say each stitch is really important. It's making the history of this creature. Just like, every little vein in your body's got a purpose. It's there to keep you together. And so, the history is important. I'm going to leave end this part of the slideshow. This is a photo that my oldest daughter did of her sister, Ava Heller. And there are my two beautiful daughters, Zoe and Ava Heller. Zoe's a photographer, and Ava is a plant biologist. And oddly enough, she ended up doing research with Arabidopsis, just like my father did, which is kind of a wonderful thing with the circle coming around. And my green-haired daughter being an artist is just wonderful. And that is the end of my slides.
Let me know when we're ready. So we're gonna take a look at her work through the gallery, the pieces that are currently up.
So this is a work that's on paper that is then also stitched on industrial felt. This is a 1-inch thick industrial felt, which I really like. I like the fleshiness of it. And I loved the idea of having a quilted paper. Yes? Okay. So this is watercolor paper. And if you remember, I was talking about Yupo paper. This is stitched on Yupo paper. And this is where a good example where you can see I drew on the back side of it to get these little shadow line work, and drew on the front of it. And then it's stitched down. So there's pieces of Yupo paper in and around all of this, and fabric, and then smaller pieces of industrial felt. I really wanted to have these pieces have elements that come off from the surface. And I really wanted, like I said, I'm really interested in getting different kinds of textures in my work. So you have kind of a watercolor texture, which is very fluid and soft. And then you have the hard lines of the marker and the pen and the Yupo paper. And then you have these soft, clumpy, lumpy industrial felt pieces. This piece is a lot of industry and communications and telephone lines and all of that, but it's also got this hint of floral growth in it. At least that's how I was looking at this with this shape here. Is all of these billowing shapes going into a floral area, all being kind of intermixed with the industrial elements, and then you get kind of into these storm areas. It's not, I don't think of it as necessarily a dark work of art, but it has a little bit of a menace to it. And it has little tiny pieces of houses. And one of the things that I think I'm interested in any work that I look at is I want to be able to see more things as I get closer to it. So I try to take particular care with making sure that as you get closer to my work, there's more lines, there's more shapes, there's more little bits of stories that you see. So this is moving on. This is one where I really worked heavily on the sides. I love making yo-yos. Yo-yos are these puffy circular bits of fabric. And this was a piece that took a very long time to make. It's got a lot of sewing on it. It was very frustrating and satisfying at the same time. One of the things that's really kind of odd about making these kind of pieces is that they're not paintings because they're in my lap or they're horizontal. So I didn't really see how they were coming together until the end when I started sewing the backing on. But this has a lot about the feeling of my mother's struggle with Alzheimer's, and also my father had cancer and the struggle that he went through in the last 2 years. And then a lot of the folks that I work with, unfortunately, there's individuals that I have grown to love over the years at Goodwill who have been struck by COVID, and over the years that I've been there, there's been a lot of loss of beautiful people just naturally. And so it's kind of all here in this one piece. These are large pieces of the industrial felt, and then little pieces, and I put in some sheer fabric just to get the sense of soft clouds, soft shapes. There's a lot of figures that have wheelchairs. Wheelchairs is something that I am very familiar with my work. Sometimes I forget that this person's in a wheelchair because it's so much a part of their body. Like there's people that I've never seen. I see them every day, but I've never seen them out of a wheelchair, and it becomes an extension of them. And they're in itself, wheelchairs are beautiful structures. This has Yupo paper. It has a lot of drawing on it, a lot of fabric on it. And some of the pieces have, I'm looking to see, I think some of the pieces have some of the Deconstructed Sik Screen on them. And I really enjoyed working on this. Each little bit that's sticking out is kind of a small little sculpture. So recently, I went with a group of artists, and I was part of a show in Cuba, and we were asked to make a work of art that would be able to travel to Cuba. And the gallery that we were showing in was somewhat open to the elements, and so I wanted to make something that was going to be really, really tough and hold up to wind and, hold up to a lot of difficult environment. So this is all Yupo paper. It's very, very tough. It can bend. It's just basically, plastic. And this is all bits and pieces of drawing elements on paper all sewn together. You can kind of get an idea of some of the sewing by the back of it. I've got very strong fingers from working on this piece because Yupo paper's not always the easiest stuff to stick a needle through. But all of these elements, it's just got lots and lots of bits and pieces of drawings that then have all came together on this backdrop of a larger piece of Yupo paper. But it's kind of a combination of, this is my house here. I put in elements of my house, elements of Ohio. These are houses that I've lived in the university area. And then there's birds all through it, because one of the things that I was thinking about when I made this was that, Cuba is a country that we don't really go visit right now. It's not so easy. This was part of a people-to-people cultural exchange, but birds don't know boundaries, and so I really focused on the beauty of the birds that crossed and lived their lives between North America and Cuba. And one thing that I found in doing a little bit of the research is that conservation of the lands that these creatures use for their nesting help bring the two cultures together. It's always, it's good for people to find things that bring them together if they're, when politics doesn't come in and things like that. And then all of this writing is all just the different names of the birds, which some of them are pretty funny. The worm-eating warbler buster, the yellow-throated warbler, the northern harrier, the black-bellied plover. Sandpiper was one of my favorites. I love watching birds. My mother was a big bird watcher. So I kind of grew up with, she used to embarrass me horribly when I was a teenager. We would go on walks in parks and she would start twittering and talking to the birds, and I would just want to just die. And I found now that as an adult, I'm just as obsessed with them. So more birds. These are some little sculptural pieces. These are all made with old fabrics and found fabrics and buttons that I collect. Some of the fabric is wool sweaters that I felted and have shrunken. Some of them are pieces of knitting that I've made that I've shrunken down and cut up. I'm horribly sentimental, so some of these have little bits of the Griffing family bed sheets, and I have a particular favorite Griffing family towels that are from 1960, and I cut up little bits of them and they end up in bits and pieces of my work. And this is just stitching for stitching's sake. I mean, this was just, and I love making round orbs. So this has little felted pieces. This is actually, this little orb right here. I don't know if you know that you can felt your pet's hair. This is Miso, our dog. I've gathered up her hair. You can make a whole new animal out of her fur. And actually there's businesses where you can send your dog's fur and they will spin it and make you a sweater. So, wool comes from sheep, and dog's fur is very, very, some dogs' fur is very similar to the textures. Again, more little birds. I loved having dolls as a child, and I still love having dolls, and I love making dolls. I guess I connect with them as much as I connect with with the houses that I make, or anything. I also really love Queen Elizabeth and the British royalty. And so this is kind of a little bit of a queen bird here. And this is yarn that years and years ago, yarn that I spun, and I think I dyed this with Kool-Aid. Electric lemonade makes a great green blue. I have a hard time throwing things out too, so a lot of this fabric comes from that. This one's got 2 little rocks in it. And this, you know, it's just a little creature, a little imaginary creature. And it's got all sorts of, it's got some bits and pieces of fabric from artist friends of mine who are quilters. And there's a piece of a slipper that I made for my daughter. Doesn't fit her anymore. There's a little bit of crochet going on. So I mix up things. And I also love, I took a bookbinding course at the Cultural Arts Center. So this is my first book that I made. And I just started sewing little bits from scraps of the piece that went to Cuba. I saved all these little bits and pieces that didn't make into it, that didn't make into the final piece. And I just started sewing them into this book. And one thing that I got interested in with these books is as you're sewing, so obviously you're sewing to the other side. And so I worked on how do I make the other side be just as interesting. So, you know, it's kind of like this earlier sketchbook where I want to have both sides talking to each other and being equally thought about. Here's a good example. I just used wax paper too. I like using, you know, really mundane things. Let's just. So I really think that the stitching as a line is really, really beautiful. So this is one of those kind of things that's really hard to show because you have to be able to pick it up for anybody to really enjoy it. And people think things are so precious in galleries, yet, you know, you don't really know what it is unless you pick it up and look at it. This is where I do a lot of thinking of the front and the back, even just with a simple line. So that was pretty fun to make. And then this is the piece that I was talking about. This is a deconstructed silk screen. All the line work here is made from drawing on a silk screen with thickened dye. And then you pull the screen, and where the dye is thick, it leaves the white behind. And the line dissolves. And as the line's dissolving from the edges, that's where you get the dark edges. And it's just, you can't paint that or draw that. It's again, it's letting the material dictate what you're going to end up with. And this also has a lot of drawing in it, in the background with boats. And I was thinking a lot about persuasion. And I guess, you know, with, see, I was doing this in this last year in the midst of the election and everything, we're all trying to persuade each other. And that's what these 2 figures are doing with their little friends up on top. This has tiny little bits of industrial felt on behind these circles. And then the whole thing is sewn onto a larger piece of industrial felt. And there's a little bit of fabric sewn on it. I'm very fond of this piece. I enjoyed working on it.
All right, let's do some Q&A. So we'll put you back up over
Okay.
here
All
and
right.
get your video on, and folks will be able to ask you some questions.
Okay. Okay.
All right, folks, so we are going to open it up to questions. And if anybody has any, feel free to. It looks like you guys have been busy in the chat. Let's see here. Sue DeLuise said that they ordered a fabric stitched house for their wife and they love it.
Thank you. Thank you, Sue.
And Susan also said, I remember when you and Mitchell did a doll making workshop at ODC, what a blast.
Yeah, well, it's easy to have a blast with Patty. And Susan, I remember you doing some stitching. You're doing some nice stitching now, too.
So I have a question for you.
Yes.
I would love to know what the Quilt and Surface Design Symposium has meant to your work.
Being part of the quilting family, I mean, it's a place. The QSDS is where you can. It's a unique experience of being around a fiber artist that I think is very different from like my experience of being in with painters. I really think it's a unique way to connect in a tactile sense. And the fiber arts, it's kind of a smaller world, so you do know a lot of the people there, and it's kind of a gathering together of friends, and it's also, I think the things that are going on in the fiber arts and like the work that's in this show is so exciting. It's so bursting out of old traditional norms. In a way, I kind of think that everything's been done in painting before, you know. I mean, that's not true. I'm sure there's all my painting friends would like clobber me, but in the fiber arts, I find myself constantly surprised, just like this show, you know, just walking in and I've seen Sue Kavanaugh's work before and I've seen Judy Rush's work before, but it's mind-boggling when you walk into it and when you see the enormity of it and you see the sense of the hand of the work, and it's a different kind of experience than you get from paintings and from I'm not know if I'm explaining this very well. But one of the other things that I think about, so I joined my friend Kate, who I talked about earlier, got me involved in the Art Quilt Network, and a lot of the members of the Art Quilt Network also are part of QSDS. And I found myself among a community of, for the most part, older women. And it was deeply moving to be among older women of my age who have had their parents get sick and die, who have had children growing up, and that they're also pretty badass and vibrant and alive and full of history and fascinating. And you know, women, I mean, it's, you know, it's kind of a you know, it's often been said, you know, the women have not been represented in the arts as much as, but now they are getting much more so. And in the fiber arts, I think the community that I found there is one of the most richest community of artists that I've ever been amongst. So It's been kind of a it's been a whole new educational experience and rebirth of inspiration for me.
So we have a question from Lee. Lee asked, some of your work reminds me of Russian folklore, Baba Yaga. Did you ever read that story?
No, I didn't. I will have to look it up. Lee, you'll have to email me that title, the name. I'd like to read that.
We have, looks like a comment and question from Jim Graham. I've really liked industrial rooftop landscapes from old factories from the turn of the 20th century.
Yeah.
Those are being torn down quite a bit for inner city development. A lot of your imagery reminds me of those landscapes. Do you ever go out and look at some of those old vent pipes and use any of them in your work?
Well, I mean, I don't go very much anywhere between working and going home. I've always been interested in the driving through rural areas of Ohio and older towns like Youngstown, where there's a lot of industrial elements. I mean, I do a lot of looking at things. I got to say, I do a lot of traveling on Google Earth. I actually had a travel journal where I would go into Google Earth and press the dice, and it randomly takes you somewhere. And then my challenge was I had to draw whatever came up on my screen. I've gotten to enjoy traveling more. One of the things that I've really noticed the difference between, say, like, well, I'm familiar with Ohio. I can't speak for all of the United States, but that the easiness it is for people to tear down old buildings versus, you know, in the United Kingdom or, well, in Cuba, sadly, a lot of the beautiful structures are crumbling. But here, it seems that age is not necessarily embraced as I would like it to be, that buildings are often destroyed when I think they should be cherished, and, you know, even if they are just left as, I don't know, sculptural elements of the landscape. We actually, in my house, we have an old barn that is from the turn of the, I mean, our house is actually probably from the turn of the 20th century. And our barn, you can see beams that have been hand hewed with axes, and you know, it's falling apart because we don't have the funds to do renovations and things like that. So I don't know if that probably didn't answer the question. It was a kind of a rambling,
We have another
wandering answer.
question. Teresa asked, I wonder what length of time this collection of work covers. I may have missed this at the presentation. Is it a lifelong collection? I love the pieces.
Oh, well, the pieces that I showed, that in my slides that I showed in my presentation, those are from the past 5 years. 2015 till now. So I guess that's more like, no, I guess, yeah, 2016, more like 2016 until I showed some of my, you know, this is actually my latest work that's hanging right behind me. So yeah. I didn't want to put in, you know, really old stuff. I figured I'd bore everybody to death if I had some of the things.
Deborah, we have a question from Amy asking, what media or art tool can you not live without? What media tool would you like to explore that you haven't had a chance yet? So 2 questions.
Okay. I can't live without a sketchbook anymore. I have actually okay, this is going to sound really crazy, but I get anxiety about which sketchbook to take with me if I go traveling. So I usually end up taking about 5 or 6, and I have different sizes with different kinds of papers, and one book that's just for, being in the kayak, but then, so I get kind of consumed with that. And what I haven't tried, I would really like to do more printmaking. I've never really done, I have done some printmaking, but I would like to get more involved in learning some of the processes with silk screen and maybe even doing lithographs and things like that. Part of the problem is, it's hard to have time for everything you want to do. My biggest fear is to run out of time to leave this earth before I've made everything I want to make.
We have a comment from Judy Rush. Judy said, "You rock, quilters as badass. 1, you're right on, and wonderful. Listen, thank you."
Oh, thank you, Judy. I love your work.
Brooke Albrecht said, "Love your work. Thank you. What was the artist's name that you took a workshop with in England?"
Oh, Rosalind Wyatt. And she does, she takes, well, her background is calligraphy, but she stitches writing, and she takes old letters and old documents, and she stitches them onto different kinds of clothing, and she has a whole stitched body of work. And it's leaving my brain now what the title of it was, but it was stitching historical documents or historical writing onto on clothing of the same time period in London, and it's just fascinating. And I got to say, it's really hard to stitch script so that it looks fluid, and she can stitch anybody's handwriting. It's just amazing to me. I mean, she can stitch something that's a scrawling handwriting, or she can stitch something that's just elegant and fluid. And and watching her work is just music, and really it's wonderful. But it really got me interested in the stitched line as a drawing tool.
Patty Mitchell would like to ask, do you have a dream residency you've always wanted to do?
My dream residency would go somewhere with Patty Mitchell, maybe in Russia or Edinburgh or Finland or Sweden or Athens, Ohio, or something with Patty Mitchell. Hint. Patty's a wonderful person, absolutely wonderful person, and is a huge inspiration in my life.
Barb Vogel said, "Your work is so wonderfully spontaneous. I love your work as well. The picture of Goodwill looks sparking." Hold on. The picture of Goodwill looked sparking. I'm not sure I know what you mean, Barb. I think she means Goodwill looks good.
Yeah, sparkling. Yeah, Barb has come to, yeah, Barb did a wonderful workshop with us where she did portraits. Everybody did their own portrait, worked on photographs, and then they're hanging in the hallway. And Barb, you're gonna have to come and look at them all hanging when COVID is gone. It's just quite spectacular. And some of them are just incredibly powerful, the paintings that people did.
Are there any more questions? All right. Well, I want to take a moment and just thank Debbie for coming in and taking the time to go deep into inspiration. And I think it's amazing to get a little peek into the mind of an artist, and you definitely gave us that tonight. Also, props to you for earning individual excellence awards from the Ohio Arts Council. That's a really big deal, and you've managed it twice. So not only, doing that, being a part of this excellent exhibition, but really having a phenomenal impact across the board.
Oh, thank you. That's lovely.
Thank you.
there's so many wonderful artists in the audience here that I can see, and it's quite an honor to be that you're interested in listening to me ramble on.
And Larkin said, thank you, Debbie. See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow, Larkin.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great night. Take care.
Bye-bye.
What was it?
We got one last comment at the end from Jim Graham. It says, thank you, Debbie. I've liked your work for so many years. It's really great for you to share your thoughts and ideas behind your work.
That's lovely. All right, closing out.